The so-called story circle is my attempt to remove all of the hard and repeated work from the task of breaking a story. You need to go search for something, find it, take it, and then return.
What's up, beautiful people? I'm Zach, and you're watching Zach Makes Movies, a channel where we talk about...
You guessed it, Frank Stallone.
So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the outlining process, and more specifically a 15-point outline process that I used for many years. I don't use it quite as much anymore, but it is incredibly helpful, so I thought I would share it with any new screenwriters who kind of wanted a little bit of a guide. I'm sure you're aware of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the Dan Harmon story circle. It's basically the same concept, but it's just broken down a lot more meticulously. So I wanted to run through it one by one and see what you guys think. It's crazy to think that you could take a 15-point outline and basically graph any movie onto it and see exactly where it hits all these individual beats, or at least a good portion of these individual beats. So let's just get right into it, starting with step 1 on the outline. We call it open intro. So in a horror movie, your intro is usually the first kill. In Scream, it's the introduction to Casey and the first murder by Ghostface. In Jaws, it's the first shark attack. This is basically your opportunity to tell your audience the tone of the movie that they're about to watch. The opening doesn't necessarily need to set up the plot of the movie, but it should always set up your tone. And that brings us to number 2, Ordinary World. So, Ordinary World, it's where we all live, hopefully. Any of you who are not currently in your Ordinary World phase, I hope things get better. Ordinary World is exactly what it sounds like. It's just the ordinary world in which we are living before we go on our Joseph Campbell hero's journey.
Coming to bed, honey?
Yes, dear.
In a romantic comedy, it's the couple that just got married, their happy life before something horrible happens. Is that a romantic comedy? That doesn't sound right. It's Rocky just trying to get by in his life, not taking any big swings. It's Tony Stark being an egotistical idiot. It's our hero not being the best that they can be, generally. And that brings us to number 3. Inciting Incident. Inciting Incident is where the story begins. Your inciting incident is your opportunity to go on this journey. And most times, the hero will initially refuse the call to action, and that is step 4. The refusal or debate. Debate or refusal stage. So this is your hero refusing to go on the hero's journey, choosing to stick with their ordinary life, and that brings us to the new world. So, this is when exciting things begin to happen to your hero. If the refusal is Dr. Grant and Sadler not wanting to go to Jurassic Park, New World is Jurassic Park. Now we have arrived. We are on the island. Let's see what happens next. Number 6. Fun, allies, and enemies. Now this is probably the most important part of any movie, in my opinion. It's not necessarily the plot, it's not necessarily the story, but it is the reason we watch movies, for fun, good guys and bad guys. That's what we want to see when we go to the movie. So this is when the villain is introduced. This is when our side characters are introduced. In Lord of the Rings, it's meeting Pippin and Merry and going on the quest, and suddenly there's some danger. We're having a little bit of fun, and now we're scared. Fun, allies, enemies. This section usually lasts between 10 and 20 minutes in the movie, depending on the length of the film, and depending on the writer's interpretation of what this actually means. But that is getting to the midpoint, and then the midpoint is a small success. It's in a superhero movie, it's Spider-Man figuring out how to shoot the webs. It's learning to fly, it's learning to fight, it's learning kung fu.
fu. Show me.
But as soon as your hero has had a small success, in order to keep things interesting, there needs to be stakes raised. So now we're raising the stakes. So at this point, the villain becomes stronger, or the challenge becomes more difficult, or the hero becomes injured. You know, something has happened now so that the small success doesn't matter as much anymore. This hill that I just walked over is nothing compared to the mountain I must now climb. So the stakes are raised. After the stakes are raised, let's go up here. You have what is called false information. False information, in a mystery film, it's thinking that you know who the killer is. In a rom-com, it's misinterpreting something, thinking that your spouse is having an affair, thinking that your friend has betrayed you. And what happens inevitably once we receive false information, things start to look bleak. So we have things look bleak. Things look bleak is not necessarily our low point, but it is the path to the low point, and that is number 11. The low point is the part of the movie where the best friend dies, or the couple breaks up. In every Seth Rogen movie ever,
the guys are friends, and then they're not friends, and then at the end of the movie, they're friends again.
In every romantic comedy, it's the breakup. It's the part of the movie where the character changes their outgoing voicemail to let you know that they're now depressed.
This is John. Whatever.
Number 12. New realization. So, it couldn't go on for long. The character finally has to learn the truth. Shrek has to find out that Fiona wasn't talking about him when she said someone was ugly. She was talking about herself. New realization. Now we get to go on our race to the climax. In every romantic comedy, this is racing to the airport to catch the girl. This is stopping the wedding. In a police thriller, it's trying to get to the victim before the killer does. In Lord of the Rings, it's that last stretch to Mordor. And once we have raced, there's nowhere to go but the climax. We're at the climax. This is the final fight. This is the final confrontation. This is the final showdown. We finally arrived at the ultimate point of the movie. We are now going to find out if our hero wins or loses. Rocky doesn't win, but he achieves his goal. In the movie, he just wanted to go the distance. He mentions that a couple of times. If in Rocky he had not said in that one speech to Adrian, all he wants to do is go the distance, the ending would not have worked because it's not actually achieving the character's goal. Him losing doesn't matter, but if he hadn't gone the distance, it wouldn't have been a strong ending. We have our climax. And after the climax, you have what I call the final scare. Again, horror is the perfect example for this. It's the last scare. It's finding out that the killer is still alive. It's when Dr. Loomis looks out the window and Michael is gone. It's Jason jumping out of the water at the end of Friday the 13th. It's the arm coming out of the ground at the end of Carrie. It's Ghostface jumping out one last time at the end of Scream.
Careful. This is the moment when the supposedly dead killer comes back to life for one last scare.
That is our final scare. And it applies to all movies. You know, in Marvel, they do their end credit sequences. It's just one last note that they want to leave you with. If the movie has a very intense ending, sometimes the filmmaker doesn't want you to leave with that taste in your mouth. So they usually tag it with a joke at the end.
Not in my movie.
But basically, that is the breakdown. And if you look at this carefully, you will be able to start to see all your favorite movies in this. And, you know, name any movie, and we can walk through each of these points. It may not necessarily be in that exact order every time, and some of these may look a little bit different, but for the most part, this is how movies are done. And for me personally, once I started using this as my outlining process, the entire way that I wrote scripts changed. Initially, the fun for me was coming up with the story while I was writing it. the enjoyment I got was finding out along with the characters what was going to happen next. So as soon as I moved that fun into the outlining process, it made writing a script a little bit less exciting, but I did get to keep that excitement in the outlining process. So now for me, at least at a certain point when I was doing this regularly, which was a good dozen scripts of mine, I would write a 10-page, generally somewhere in that range, 10-page outline, just breaking down my plot into these 15 sections, and I would often have, ideas kind of tagged along with asterisks at the bottom, and those would be kind of plot points that I wasn't sure exactly where they would go. So you don't need to drive yourself crazy. If you have ideas and you want to use this outline process, but you don't know exactly where those ideas are going to go, don't worry about that. Just put that in your notes and just remind yourself that you're going to need to find a place to put that. And while you're writing, it may suddenly dawn on you, or more likely what happens is you get to a point and you suddenly realize something needs to happen that you didn't account for in the outline, and that's where you can shove it in. Yeah, so for me, my first 10 or so scripts, I did not outline at all. I would just jump right into it. It was the most fun I had writing scripts because I wasn't thinking about sellability, I wasn't thinking about marketability, I wasn't thinking about production or cost. I was just trying to have as much fun as possible. I made another video called My First 5 Scripts where I talk about the process of writing those 5 scripts. If you want to check that out, you can hear a little bit more about how absolutely fantastic those are. But once I started this outlining process, I went 100% into it, and that was the only way that I did it for several years. But what happened is, at a certain point, I started to realize that you really start to put yourself in a box if you're determining how your movie's going to end before you actually write it. And listen, that's not always the case. If you're writing a mystery, you need to know how it's going to end to some degree. You know, there's always going to be some genres where you need to know where you're going before you get there. But overall, I think that in order to make sure that your film is not completely mathematical, it's actually better to outline the first 2 acts and then have a very loose idea of what's going to happen in the 3rd act, and then just let the script kind of guide you so that you can find out yourself. Because I've said this before, but the amount of times that I came up with some ideas in the outline for what was going to happen to a side character, for example, and then suddenly they get into a confrontation. And in my outline, I decided everyone leaves that confrontation alive, but while I'm writing the script, I just decide that one of these characters is going to mouth off or is going to pull some dumb move, and suddenly he gets himself killed. And that's just what happens naturally in writing that scene, even if I hadn't necessarily planned for it. So when that happens, suddenly everything I had outlined with that character goes out the window. So I always have to be prepared for things like that, and you kind of want to give yourself room for things like that to happen because it makes the story feel less color by number. It makes it start to feel a lot more alive. After several years of outlining this way, I started to kind of slowly go back to the old way. I would go from having 10, 15, 20-page outline to having 5-page outlines, and then 3-page outlines, and then it would just be like a 1-pager where I just do basically a sentence for each of these just to have the generic idea of where I'm going with the story, but then I jump into it and kind of go fly by the seat of your pants like I did when I was 17. Anyway, that's all for today. Thanks so much for watching as always. I'm Zach. You're watching Zach Makes Movies. Let me know in the comments where you are in your writing journey. So if there's anything specifically you wanted me to talk a little bit more about in depth, let me know in the comments and I'll be happy to consider that. Otherwise, my next video is going to be about the editing process. I'm in the middle of editing my feature film right now. You can check out the trailer right here, but look out for that video next week. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, and have a good week, my friends.